I think it's this big myth that we've been led to believe that in order to make impact or do good in this world, we are not allowed to make profit, or that just is in complete incongruence, but that is just not true.
Hi, my name is Kristin Constable, and welcome to the Soulful CEO Path, where wisdom blends with strategy and success is measured in alignment and impact. This podcast is all about guiding soul-centered bosses like you through the integration of soul and strategy in business. So in each episode, we explore the journey of creating a deeply fulfilling business that honors your values, nurtures your spirit, and serves the world. And today, I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest, Joanna Buczkowska-McCumber. Joanna is the CEO and Chief Impact Strategist at Impact for Ideas, a full-service sustainability agency for climate and impact startups to support them with comprehensive, actionable strategies to address social and environmental challenges through the business lens. So some of the notable things that Joanna's gotten up to recently is she has created Ideas for Impact as a B Corp certified organization. They are a WBE, women-owned certified business. They got recognized as one of the top 10 business ventures to watch out for by Douglas Magazine in 2023. They got the Best New Business Award in 2024 and are working with some amazing change-making clients. So this is no big deal. And so with that intro, welcome to the show, Joanna. And I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
Great to be here, Kristin.
Awesome. Well, we've known each other for a while, so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I've seen the evolution of your business and it has been super inspiring. And what actually made me reach out to you was I saw one of your posts on LinkedIn and I was like, I need to chat with you about what you're up to because there has been so much going on and you're doing things that are getting attention, like obviously with all of what I just shared with you. So I'm excited to dive in, and I want to start with asking you this question that I think kind of gets thrown around, and whether people explicitly say it or not, there's this question of whether businesses can create income if they are driven by impact. Like, does it have to be one or the other, or do you see a world in which they actually go really well together?
So in all my work, and not just in the work that I'm doing now, but sort of historically throughout my career, I've been very fortunate to work with just all of these folks that truly believe that in order to have a great business and in order to have a business that creates impact, it can also create profit. And so ultimately, you don't have to sacrifice one for the other, or you shouldn't. I think historically, we've been sort of conditioned to, the way that business has been run, the way that businesses have been set up are for the majority to create profit for shareholders, right? But we know that that is now becoming a more antiquated way of thinking around, like, what is the future of business and the future of hybrid businesses that are popping up all over the world. And I think what we've seen, especially in the last 5 years, with the emergence of topics like ESG and impact investing and sustainability reporting and the whole slew of greenwashing and companies that have come under the gun essentially for not doing the things that they say that they're doing or going to be doing. And what that all points to is the realization in society that business has to be done in a better way. And it's not just, an option, it's going to be a non-negotiable in the future. And, 100%, I'm a strong believer that in order to make impact, you can make profit. And that's really like all the work that I do. That's all the advisory work that I do with various companies and organizations. And I think it's this big myth that we've been led to believe that in order to make impact or do good in this world, we are not allowed to make profit, or that just is in complete incongruence, but that is just not true.
Yeah. Love that perspective, your clarity on that. And you can hear the conviction you have behind that. And the cool thing is you're not just speaking from hypothetical, is you get to work with clients every day who are doing this and realizing this. And I think that it's really important that it's not just ideal. Because I think that a lot of people are like, well, it would be ideal if we could do both. But I hear what you're saying is the truth is it's not just ideal, it's possible. And actually it's becoming the not the norm, but it's becoming what people are looking for when they're making decisions around where to work, who to buy from, all of those types of things. Would you say that that is true in your opinion?
For sure. I think like we're seeing this big shift in the marketplace, in society. And of course there's like all these other pressures that are political and economic and like financial that are making it hard for people to make some of those decisions, because
Yeah.
sometimes, we make decisions that are, we're going to go for what's cheapest or what's most convenient based on like what we've experienced in our lives. So it can be hard to sort of shift towards these new products or new companies or new ways of doing things in our lives. Having said that, there are these major shifts that are allowing impact companies and companies that really put sustainability, that are putting people, that are putting just better ways of doing as a priority. Those
Mhm.
companies are coming to the forefront, and people are noticing, and people are making those decisions with their purchasing power,
Yeah.
or with where they go work, or where they partner up.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit in terms of this certification called B Corp. I need to be educated on this myself because I know a little bit about it, but I don't know a lot about it. But it seems like it's kind of like the holy grail when it comes to like, oh, you're a B Corp organization. You like stand for impact and sustainability and doing things in a way that's like aligned with, certain set of values. So, can
Yeah.
you share with us a little bit what this like certification title is all about? And
Yeah.
then I'd love to hear why it was important for you at Ideas for Impact to become a B Corp organization.
For sure. So, I mean, B Corp is a certification that essentially certifies your whole company and verifies that your company is doing its work across these sort of five paradigms that they look at, and they're shifting in the near future in terms of what they're going to be. But these five paradigms in your business, and looking at, are you performing for the good of the people or for the good of the planet? And are you actually doing the things that you say you're going to be doing, or that you say you do on your website, or that you say you do in your marketing, or even in your application, right? So
Yeah.
they've got a hard job in actually figuring out, are you actually measuring scope 1, 2, 3 emissions? Are you actually treating your employees well? And it's more than just looking at, like, do you do these things, but looking deeper in terms of understanding, do you have the policies to support that? Do you actually have programs and organizational standards that actually support some of this bigger thinking around, if you're going to treat your employees well, what does that actually mean? And so they really look at, the entirety of the organization. And unlike other certifications that maybe are certifying like your product from a sustainability perspective, or from fair trade perspective, or something like Ocean Wise, that's really looking at one element of a product or performance of a company, whereas B Corp actually certifies your entire company. It's saying your
Okay.
entire company, not just your product or not just one activity that you undertake. Your entire company can be verified as a company that's doing good for people and planet. And
Yeah.
so that can be a really powerful, tool for many companies to utilize, to say, hey, these are really important values to us. We do a lot of hard work in making sure that, we have programs and processes, and we do, work with our suppliers or whatever it is that they're doing.
Mhm.
And we want to make sure that that is reflected in the marketplace. Because sometimes, again, in this world where greenwashing and climate litigation is like popping left, right, and center, we want to make sure, how can we actually say that we are authentically doing good without coming
Right.
under the microscope. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to actually get this certification that validates that we are doing the things that we say we're doing. We're not greenwashing, and that we actively have to work towards doing better. So with B Corp, you have to recertify every 3 years. So it's not
Mhm.
something that you just get and you get for forever. You have to
Yeah.
recertify it every 3 years. And they have a scoring system that is public, right? So if you get a B Corp certification, that score, and not just the final score, but sort of that, what that score is made up of, it's all public. So anybody can go look at, and that level of transparency is, another
Mhm.
part of that, uh, authentically sticking out there as a company that's doing good.
Yeah.
For me, with Ideas for Impact, when I started the company, as a sustainability agency, as a company that's working with others to create sustainability strategies, sustainability plans, and reporting that truly reflects that impact work, it was like a non-negotiable to become a B Corp, because it's that idea of like, we need to, you know, we gotta walk on what we say we do, right?
Walk
Like
the
we
talk.
we
Yeah.
can't, we don't certify it ourselves. We're sort of like selling short, right? We're like,
Yeah.
we're telling
Like,
everybody
we
else
should
to,
do that, but we're not
yeah,
going to.
but we're
Yeah.
not. It's like too hard for us. Or like,
Yeah.
so that's what we see a lot of. A lot
Mhm.
of people will do that though. They're like, oh well, like like we'll do this one thing, but then they realize how hard it actually is to actually like refine your employee strategy and processes and
Yeah.
procedures. And they're like, okay, well, we'll do this on the product side, but we're not actually going to do everything on the people side. And this is why a certification like B Corp is important, because it is actually looking at that 360 perspective of your business. Because what we see a lot of the times, like I say, it's like there's almost like this narrow focus on like it's a product or supply chain, or it's maybe it is on governance, or maybe it is on people like diversity, equity, inclusion, but it's not
Right.
holistically looking at how do we do good all across the organization. And when we
Yeah.
see companies actually trying to get the B Corp certification and start to dive into that work, which is actually reflective of a lot of the work that's done in sustainability or in ESG, they're like, oh, this is really hard. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know where in the life cycle of sustainability and the work that we do, somebody thought that it was going to be easy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're going to measure scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, and then we'll be done with it. But yeah, this work is really hard, because you're trying to change the way that you run a business, and to actually show that it is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, change management in any capacity is hard, anyways. And then now
Yes.
to shore that up with these certain measures that may not be, you know, they may compete with some other things that you have in terms of
Oh,
priorities
for
within the
sure.
business. So super
Yeah.
interesting. Thanks for explaining all that. What does B Corp stand for? I feel a little silly asking that, but like, is it like, what's the is it an acronym, or what does it stand for?
It's B Corp. And then, so there's also a benefit company, which is an actual legal entity incorporation that if you are a B Corp, you actually have to get as well.
Okay.
So let's say you get a B Corp certification, you actually, and this is why this is an important part, that part of B Corp is you actually have to change your articles of incorporation and the way that you're structured a bit, to actually say that you also you are creating a benefit to
Okay.
your community, to people. And so that is an important distinction. But yeah, there's the benefit company and then B Corp as
Okay.
a,
Cool.
yeah.
Super interesting.
we need like a glossary of terms.
Totally. Yeah. Like, we'll put these all in the show notes
Yeah,
so
yeah,
everyone
yeah,
can
yeah,
follow
yeah, yeah.
along.
Yeah,
But I think it's
exactly.
interesting because otherwise you
Yeah,
hear these terms, right? And it's like it
sure.
becomes this
Yeah.
thing, but I'm like, oh, does that actually stand for something that is beyond, yeah, that piece. But thanks for clarifying that. And just out of curiosity, I don't know if you know this number, but like currently, how many companies, like what's
Mhm.
the percentage of say B Corp organizations out there compared to others? Like, is it very small? Because you're making it sound like it's like quite a like privilege, but also a difficult thing to get.
I don't know the stats of the top of my head,
Mhm.
of the top of my head, but there's probably like around maybe 4,000, 5,000, probably like
Okay.
4,000, I would say, B Corps
Yeah.
around the world. And if we think about that, in Canada alone, like there's like over 1 million businesses in Canada alone, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's a pretty
and
exclusive club.
this is pretty exclusive. It's sort of it's not trying to be exclusive. I think
Yeah.
the reality though is that the number of companies that are, taking this as a priority and their journey of building a company is still fairly small. And I think
Mhm.
like a lot of the times we hear a lot of people talking about sustainability and impact, and like everybody's doing good and everybody's got these programs, and we're adhering to these new rules that are coming down the line. But when we actually look at the numbers and we start talking to people on the ground, those numbers are still pretty small of companies that are fully self-selecting to do, good holistically versus just doing it in a narrow way, whether it's a CSR program or whether it's like measuring some scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions because they have to. There's still a long way to go. I mean, the important note is that more and more people are talking about this, which is important.
Mhm.
And it has become mainstream to talk about it and to understand even like B Corp or ESG or sustainability and some of these terms on this
Yeah.
macro level. Like when I got into this work, gosh, so long ago, and the sort of in the beginning 2000s, most people weren't talking about this at all. We had like, there was no articles out there about this on a daily like we see now. Nobody was talking about climate change, really. Nobody was talking about how it was affecting businesses and their long-term performance. Certainly when we looked at like the startup ecosystem, we weren't seeing like tons of startups popping up with this kind of, ideology and with that at the forefront in terms of what they were building. So we've come a long way, but we're
Yeah.
still, it's like the real proof still has to come in terms of
Yeah.
most companies trying to like actually doing this work well.
Totally. Well, let's transition a bit into that. So, a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this podcast are small business. They're probably service based businesses in some way, consultants, coaches, things like that. And so it might sound or seem like some of this that we've been talking about so far doesn't like apply, right? It's like these bigger organizations. I'd love for you to dive into if, someone who is in small business who, is thinking about, I want to create a more impact driven business, what would be some great places to start so that they could start moving, in that direction?
Yeah, I always I think there's like you're never too small to start on this path. And I really think it starts with this defining what your values are as a company, and as a, if you're small, if it's just you or you and somebody else, or a very small team, it's like, what are the values that you all share? What's important for you to bring into the world? And making sure that, a component of impact, or however you want to define it for yourself, that is part of that value system. Because I think that
Right.
is an important part, and it seems simple, and it's like really part of like the core identity of every company. But and
Mhm.
it's harder when you're smaller, because you don't have a big team. But it is really important to think about like, what is that value system, because that allows you to prioritize the things that are important, and especially like what clients you bring in, or maybe like
Mhm.
what suppliers you use, or where you purchase your furniture, where you purchase your office supplies, etc., right? Like
Yeah.
all of those things start making a difference. And when you have that value system, you're able to make those decisions that align with your values.
Right.
And so that would
Yeah.
be like the beginning part. And everybody, like, I think it's important for everybody to know too. It's like, you don't have to have some perfect sustainability plan or impact idea. I think what's most important is to have it's to have that conviction to do something with
Mhm.
impact, and know that as you keep on building and growing, like a lot of that will come and a lot of that will be developed, but you don't have to have that sustainability plan right off the bat. I mean, we even say that to bigger companies, right? Like, you're all
Mhm.
going to figure it out as we go, because it is an evolution. Things are moving so quickly, and everybody to some degree is defining what impact means to them in a different way. Like if I'm
Mhm.
a CPG company in the food space, my impact might be very different than if I am a service provider consultant in HR, and
Mhm.
I'm small, right? Like that's going to look different, and it's most important to understand what that means to you and how you want to define it.
Yeah.
And I think that is the really like important first step for everybody to consider.
Yeah, that's super accessible. And I think that to your point is like having clarity on your value system in a business is so important to many different levels. So if that's not
Yeah,
already in place for you, it's not
yeah,
only going to help you here, it's going to help you in a ton of different places. So
for
starting
sure.
there is like a really great way to get started.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we
Yeah.
could be like, oh yeah, you need to like measure your scope 1, 2, 3, like
Mhm.
emissions, and start mapping that out. And yes, those things are important, but like anybody can add that in. Those are things that we have formulas for that. We have structures for that. And you, when you're ready, you can add that in. But that value system, like nobody can make that up for you, right? Like
Mhm.
that's not something that we can easily duplicate, so that it's like authentic to you and your business.
Yeah. And I imagine that allows it to be the whatever, however the plan evolves, much more sustainable over the long run because it's actually authentic and true. And you want to show up and live into that more and more.
For sure. Exactly. I mean, like, I know that this is like so like core to the work you do, right? And I've had conversations with you about this, but it is so true. Like it is that authenticity about like, why are we doing this and for what reason, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is where a lot of companies get into trouble, is because they try to be something that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Internally, right? And like this is where people get called out. This is where employees call their companies out, or customers, or even boards of directors. And that's because what's happening internally, or it doesn't actually match what's been said externally, right? So like
Right.
I think it doesn't just apply to the small companies, but to every size company. And it is like I think sometimes like people are like, it's authenticity, like values, it's so woo woo. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but like it's sort of, it gets down to the core components of like why we do what we do. And if we can't have a conversation about that, then like everybody's human. It all makes a difference, right? We all have
Right.
values. And so like if we ignore that, that's when we get back into that same place that we are in, where where we've gotten like into trouble.
Totally. Yeah. That's super helpful. Well, thank you for that. And then I'd love to hear from you. Well, like, what are you working on these days that you're really excited about? Like, whether it's projects or like things that are really lighting you up in your work.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing some really, some great work exploring this idea of like, how do we actually bring, sustainability, or even things like ESG, or these bigger topics, to all sorts of companies, like small, medium-sized companies, to like startups. And some of the work that we're starting to work on, and we've done it a bit for some clients, but to figure out like, how do we actually develop content and training that's really accessible to this
Mhm.
larger community of companies, so that they can easily just like grab onto it and take it away. We're not talking about some like extensive academy or anything like that, but how do we actually create content and learning so that every organization and company can actually start like jumping on this journey of sustainability?
Sure.
For us, that's like been something that's been really important to define. It's like we do want to have, it's not just about like having, some contracts or clients for me and like the folks that I work with. It is about like, how do we actually like, what's going to make a difference in this world? And sure, like working with a bunch of clients will, but like what will, shift the needle even more is by like everybody having this information at hand and these tools at hand so they can use it. So, that's something that we're excited about, is like, how do we actually give people the tools to like do
Mhm.
this themselves without
Yeah.
feeling like they need to, hire somebody or to even understand what it is that we're talking about. And so
Right.
that's really exciting. We've sort of added a podcast to that too. So that's
Yeah.
fun. Getting into the content game, which has been a
Yeah.
good learning. Like, I think like that's exciting for me because it's an opportunity to like just like really play around and experiment and research like what content is out there. I think when you get into client work or doing, the work of business, like you sometimes lose sight of that, right? Like
Yeah.
like, why are we here? Like, what is the content that we care about? So
hmm
that's really fun. And then like
What's the name of the podcast so people can look it up? We'll link it in the show notes. But
it's called Ideas for Impact.
oh, okay, very easy to find. See, that's a really good marketing play.
Easy, just make everything the same.
Yeah,
It just
exactly.
seemed like such an easy, like, the name lent itself well for a podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been really fun. And talking to, in that podcast, we talked to a variety of different founders and companies that have really scaled their impact. And like a lot of the conversations in that are like, how do you scale impact without compromising
hmm
on the impact? Because
Yeah.
again, like to our conversation earlier, that is, it's still a big point of tension for a lot of founders and teams, making sure that they're not compromising on the impact when they grow, make more profit. But with profit come other challenges, right? You got to
hmm
make decisions around suppliers, around where things are manufactured, or like, how you hire, who you hire. So, those things are all really, really important. And so like that podcast was really fun to create with my co-host Deborah Houst. And then we're working on like some other fun things around seeing like, capital plays a role in all of this as well. So we're
Mhm.
sort of looking and exploring like sort of another angle to that content piece around like how does capital play a role, which we know it plays a huge role in our world in business. And so how do we actually shift that to, to almost like to put the fire or fuel the impact that we always seek to have. So yeah,
Yeah.
some really just like really fun projects. Like we've got like, really fun client work, of course, but like I always get excited by some of this like amazing content and like
Yeah.
other work that we dive into that just allows us like, again, to explore like what if and
Yeah.
what could happen if we just thought differently.
Yeah, super exciting. And what I hear, I mean, the client work, as you said, is always amazing. But what I hear in
Yeah.
terms of a theme around what you're sharing there is that you're doing a lot of work that's making this conversation more broad and accessible.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool because otherwise it can get stuck in these little pockets and it
Yeah.
becomes this little echo chamber of people who are all talking about the same thing and we're
Yeah.
all in the same world. But does it get out there to the bigger population for someone who
Exactly.
may not have even heard about or really be aware of
Exactly.
this kind of stuff to be like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to binge that content for a while and understand it. And now it's like this ripple effect. So I love that you're doing that and playing in that space.
Exactly. Exactly, right? So,
Yeah. Awesome. So I have one last question for you that I ask everyone who comes on the show. And
okay.
the name of this podcast is the Soulful CEO Path. And it really is to share what soulful CEOs out there are up to in their journeys. And so I'd love to hear from you. When you think about being a soulful CEO, what does that mean to you?
For me, it comes back to some of the things we talked about. You know, first of all, like understanding and then staying true to the values of like no like personally what it is that you prioritize, but more importantly in the business, uh and aligning those together. And hopefully those have a lot of crossover, and then just really staying true to those,
Mm-hmm.
um really staying true. And for me, a lot of the times too, it's like we can be true to them in our business, but like how do we stay true to them in our home lives or in our day to
Mm-hmm.
day, right? Like it's like we want people to have impact or we want people to have balance, and then you're like, at home you're like run run ragged because you're not actually living that truth at home. And so for me, it's been a long learning too to be like, okay, what are those values, what is really important, family, friends, time on your own, and like in nature and connecting. And for me, one of the things too, as you grow a business, and part of those values is like, are we actually connecting to the things that we say we're doing? And so for me, it is about like connecting to nature. It is
Mm-hmm.
connecting to like the planet, right? Like if we're
Yeah.
going to try to save it, like I need to stay connected to it. And so that's been really important. And then to the people, and like really showing up authentically in all the places that I'm at, whether it's work
Mm-hmm.
or home or life or in some other sort of sense. But I think that has been the biggest thing, is like, how do
Yeah.
we authentically show up with
Mm-hmm.
those values that we've set? Because those, those show up in our lives, but they also show up in our business with our teams,
Yeah.
and with the people we work with partners. And I think that is like so important.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful answer. Thank you for that. I love it. You know my thoughts on
Yeah,
values and
I know you
alignment and all
agree.
of that. You're speaking my language. Yeah, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so true. It can be that simple. It's not easy all the time, but it can be that simple, which is, yeah, really, I think helpful as like a takeaway for people from this
Well,
conversation.
yeah, and I think like you know what, and I'll speak to that too. Like I think when we had met originally, like long time ago, I always thought, like I always wanted to overcomplicate like what it
Hmm.
meant to be like really values driven, and because you're just like have these ideas, and then when I started working through it all, it just sort of really came down. It's like actually it's so much simpler than we think it is, right? Like it's not some overcomplicated matrix. It's not some kind of overcomplicated routine. it actually just comes down to like these, 3 to 5 values we set for ourselves and what they mean to us. And I think
Yes.
when I recognized that, it was like, oh, I'm not going to stress about this. I'm actually like living it is actually easier than trying to plan for it.
Yes. Yes. Well, that sounds like a great place to end off. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Thank
being on
you.
here, sharing your wisdom. And what we're going to do is we're going to share all of the things you mentioned, your podcast, your work,
Yeah.
in the show notes below. So if anyone wants to check out Joanna and her work, you can connect with her there. And thank you for all of you who listened to this episode with us. I hope you're taking something away from this conversation that can support you in your own journey. And if you found this episode helpful, please remember to subscribe and follow. It does wonders for the show so more people can find and benefit from these conversations. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Kristin Constable, and I'll see you in the next episode.